Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a video about this Hanwei Oni Katana, and it's a supplemental bit of information that I really didn't have the chance to include in my previous review because I either didn't have the skill, the tools, the aptitude, or the sources. So, for example, I didn't have a reliable source of tatami, or as good a camera, or the weapon dynamics computer, and all of those things will be showcased in this video here. I will put links to said things, the weapon dynamics computer, the specifications, and any other interesting bits in the description down below, so reference that if you'd like. Alright, disclaimer time. There are some things to note about this sword before you hear me say anything else about said sword, and that is, first and foremost, it's secondhand, which means it may not be 100% representative of what you would expect to get from Hanwei if you were to buy one new, or Cultivatina, or an authorized distributor, but basically if you were getting a new product that wasn't this. Now, to me, it didn't look like it had a lot of signs of handling. There were some mild cutting scratches on it, but not anything really substantial. It didn't look like it had been used a lot, and I think I can tell if a sword has been used for years and years and years, and or even to some large degree, and this did not give me the impression that it was. I have some pictures that I took before I did any of the review, and maybe you'll have the same opinion. Anyway, know that it is secondhand, so keep that in mind, that that's a variable. Two, know that I am a novice in the realm of sword practicing. I'm also just an enthusiast. I'm not some grandmaster, and my opinions are just that, my opinions, so take them with a grain of salt. Know that it's just my personal thoughts. I hope they help you make a decision, but they're the opinions of some guy that doesn't necessarily know it all, so, or definitely doesn't know it all. Lastly, know that I'm not affiliated with Hanwei. I bought the sword with my own money, even secondhand. They're not asking me to do the review. I'm really doing this because the original Oni review is one of the most popular videos that I've made, and people have asked me a lot of questions on it, and it didn't paint the Oni in a particularly lovely light. To recap that one, which I will again put in the description down below, after whacking it into a stand, it got kind of fucked up, and in that sense the edge had rolled, there was some damage, and years later, after kind of reflecting on that incident, it's the only sword really to date that has been damaged by hitting the stand. No other sword in all of the bad cuts that I've made have been damaged by, at least to that degree, by my stand. So it stands as a pretty big failure, and something that probably wasn't heat treated correctly. I don't know if it was a temper. I don't know what the process is to make L6. It's supposed to be something of a arduous or difficult metal to work with, but in any case, it didn't have the temper or the heat treatment that it should have to preserve the edge. It was almost like it was non-heat treated steel. So to any degree, it didn't go well. It didn't paint the Oni in a very kind light, and the Oni is a cool as hell sword. So if I get into the actual review part of the sword, most of my thoughts years later are pretty consistent. I think the Fujikashira and the Kurigata are the coolest looking Fujikashira and Kurigata that Hanwei makes. They've got bomb-ass demon faces on them. I like the black on black with silver accents. I think that's cool as hell as well, and thematically it stands out as one of the coolest looking swords that I think Hanwei has made. Now, I could do maybe with a shorter handle. I don't personally like the long in there, but whatever. It's cool as hell, and I do like the theme. I like the saya. I like the ribbing on the saya. I still stand that the Tsuba, which is nice. Let me actually talk about the Tsuba for a second. Here's a couple Tsuba that we have in terms of different stuff. All of these are from less expensive swords, but it's an example of when I say casting quality on Hanwei is good, a little bit more elaborate as to why. So here you can make out the kind of lines between the waves are much further apart than they are, say, in this demon's hair, right? The casting lines are much closer, and I can make out kind of individual strands. If I look at little details like the toenail or the horns, I can make those out. The facial features here are also pretty well defined, or at least I can tell there. I can make out some muscle tone in this kind of demon guy over here. Where in this dragon, for example, the eyes are a little muddy, and it's just not as clean. The lines are further spaced apart, and it seems to kind of blend more into the Tsuba in the background. You can definitely tell, see a lot more muddied casting detail in both of these examples, as where this one, even though it's a relatively simple design, things look pretty crisp and clean for a cast piece. So, well, I do think that the casting quality is good on the Tsuba. The kind of plain Jane background, as well as the demon that doesn't match as coolly as the other demon faces. The same as with Menuki. I think that those could be different or better. In fact, oddly, I have a different sword, which is made by Pavel Bolf, which is in a custom mount that has some, basically it has the Tsuba and Menuki that I think would probably go better with this sword than they might with that one. Anyway, I think there are examples of ways that you can improve the fitting set, but I digress. It's a subjective thing, and I just don't think that they're as cool as they could be, or thematically match as good as the Fujikasha and Kurikata do. Those are the things that stand out to me as awesome. The other thing to note is the saya does things that sayas do. It holds the blade reasonably well, but it does have a bit of a rattle. It's more than a bit, but... Now you may also notice that I'm going in the wrong order for my typical review. Oftentimes I start at the kasha, I'm going to end there, and there's a reason for that. But for the moment I'm going to go onto the blade. And the blade this time, I'm happy to say that through the process of my testing, I did some tatami mat cutting, I whacked it into some brush, I whacked it into the stand, and to get to the punchline, it didn't deform the edge. Now, I don't know exactly, as I look at the old video of me cutting into the stand and seeing the damage, the video quality is not that great, but it's tough to say how much chutzpah I'm putting on the cut. I don't know how much force I'm really directing in there. It's tough to say, so I tried to whack the stand the same way with some degree of force a few times and whack some brush. My stand's got some upgrade. It's got a PVC pipe stuck in it now to kind of keep the peg secure. But I did hit brush, I did hit some other hard targets, and I don't see any edge deformation of any kind. Now note that the edge is not perfect. There's some blemishes and some mild serrations and things that look like it probably came that way. It's not the best, the cleanest edge, and you can probably see that in some of the tatami cutting that really, this speaks more to maybe the dynamics of the sword and how it moves, but as I tried to move it in class, it didn't really move well. I couldn't let the sword just do the work for me. I had to muscle through a bit, not a lot, but still as the cutting profile of something that is really purpose-built to cut tatami or be a cutter of that sort, and it did the job. But I thought it would be a little bit more effortless, if you will. Some of the Hanwei XL lines, the Tori as well as the Musashi, as well as just the practical XL, have all been really, really pleasant cutters to work with. They kind of glide through the targets and they don't require me to muscle through them, at least with some of the tatami single rolls that I'm accustomed to dealing with. They're much easier to cut with, and this did surprise me that it was a little bit more difficult. Now, there are some things and elements to the blade that I think are worth talking about that could contribute to that. One, earlier I alone noted that some of these Oni Katana come with this polish where the flat of the blade, the shinogi area, has some roughness to it. Now, if I bring up this video here, you can see that as my finger scratches along the surface of the polish, it kind of has this rough sound to it. And if I go on the edge, it's less, and on the spine where it's a mirror polish, it's very smooth. But you can hear there's roughness in the polish, and maybe that contributes to it, but I don't really think so. Now, that said, the roughness, I should note as well, I've had to clean this sword a few times now after cutting, and it's not fun to clean. It chews up the rags that you use, so you're gonna go through it. If you have like a nice microfiber cloth, it kind of eats it up pretty quick. So it's not fun to clean the sword, and if I use like some metal polish, it really gets stuck in between those little fibrous things, and it's a real pain in the ass to clean. So keep that in mind as well. Hopefully this video helps illustrate when I say texturally it has some sort of feeling to it. You can probably see it just a little bit better. Moving back onto the dynamics though, the first thing I really did with this sword was take pictures of it and then stick it on a wall for a few months. The second thing I really did with the sword was just brought it to the dojo and used it. I warmed up with it a little bit before class, and then I did the cutting that you saw earlier. So the thing is that The sword isn't fun to move. I used it for maybe like 15 minutes before class. I used it during and throughout my class of a couple hours where I did kata and practiced and did that kind of stuff with it. Not fun to use at all. So the grand experience that I have with this sword is really maybe 2.5 to 3 hours worth of usage. And I can't say that I found the experience particularly pleasant at all, which is really funny. So the sword is just a little over 3 pounds, and dynamically, that's not the heaviest thing. There's going to be more specifics in the link down below, or the description down below, and I'll also throw up the weapon dynamics computer. It was not a fun sword to move around at all. I didn't like it. I didn't like it one bit. Now, the fact that it was a bad time for me, I think requires a little bit of explanation, mostly because my earlier review gave it stunning accolades for how dynamic and fun it was to move around, and now I'm saying it wasn't a comfortable experience at all, so what gives? Unfortunately, I don't have the information around from the previous review that shows me all the same level of detail dynamically, and how this sword might be different from the others. Now, we've seen in previous examples from Hanwei swords that they may differ several ounces, which can dramatically change how the sword feels. This one doesn't seem like it's really overly heavy, but it gives me some very strange impressions, and because I gave it such accolades beforehand, I think I need to formalize or maybe articulate myself better as to why it feels that way, and at least some factors that could contribute to it. So first and foremost, I think it's important to know that I'm doing more formalized Iaido training. I'm doing more kata. I study 2 different styles of kenjutsu, and I'm doing more tatami cutting. In the past, I did a lot more backyard fun, but my training has become quite a bit more formal, and I'm starting to try and control the sword a lot more. I'm trying to stop it as I move through the target. I move through the target, but to stop the sword rather than overswing constantly. They're all concepts that I'm working on. I'm getting better at. I have a long way to go, as you can plainly see from the footage. But they're things I'm trying to do, and as I'm trying to do them, this sword wants to jump out of my hand, and it provides me with a sensation of discomfort that I don't recall feeling. I remember feeling how great this sword felt, and now it feels almost clubbish and not dead in my hand, but cumbersome, unwieldy, and just like it only feels good in an upright position. Then it feels actually okay. It feels surprisingly balanced. It looks like this big, giant, imposing sword, and when you simply hold it upright, it actually feels nimble and balanced. I also feel some degree of point control, but as soon as this sword kind of leans forward, it just wants to jump out of your hand. I don't know if it's that the ito is not super tight. It's not slippery or anything like that. The silk quality is pretty good. Or if it's just really big, even in my sausage hands, it's tough to get a good firm grip on it. But it feels like it wants to jump out of my hands a little bit, and it's not fun to move around, honestly. I don't really like the length of the handle personally, but I didn't find it particularly fun to move at all. I wasn't enjoying practicing with it. I didn't really like using it in class. It wore me out. It was tough to move around, even though it's not the lightest sword. It feels like it's a pound heavier when you're actually using it than it actually is. And on top of that, it feels like a pound lighter when you're just holding it still and upright. So it's dynamically very weird, and the weapon dynamics computer doesn't show me necessarily why that is, or maybe it does and I just can't interpret it correctly, but it's a very strange dynamic sword, and for something that feels so hefty and like it wants to lurch forward and jump out of my hands, it didn't cut well. A lot of times those swords with those forward momentums feel, like you give them some motion, you throw them out there, and they do the work for you in the cut. And this one, it didn't fail in the cut. It wasn't a bad cutter, but it certainly didn't impress me. And I suppose that's what I'm really looking for, is to be impressed by this sword. I desperately want to love it and for it to be special and cool because it's got some bomb-ass fittings. But frankly, the other practical, the Tori, the Musashi, the other XL type geometry blades that are out there from Hanwei, I think do a better job. Good news, the blade held up, so I guess there's that. Now, the other bits that I suppose I didn't get a chance to touch on, or something that other folks might find interesting, as I talk about the blade and the handle, I can talk about what's underneath, which is the tang, the nakago, and the Oni nakago seems to consistently not have as much file marking or as much attention to detail as other Hanwei swords do. Oftentimes Hanwei blades have this very deliberately made file marking piece, and this does not. It's kind of plain Jane, and fits much more on the average with a lot of the other swords that come out of China, but a lot of times it's nice to see that underneath the handle there's some attention to detail that other manufacturers don't put in there, and it gives you some confidence that the rest of the sword has that same level of detail, and this doesn't. It has a signature, it has some stuff, but it doesn't have the same attention to detail, and I guess it kind of shows. But the mainstay is that after whacking it into things, the edge isn't deformed. However, as you note, I did not start the review in my normal, or this talk in my normal area, which is usually the kasha, and that's because this little son of a bitch comes off. Now, I told you, the sword was secondhand, it didn't see a lot of use, and everything seemed pretty on par, like it had been more of a decoration when I got it. And I've spent a grand total of about 3 hours using it, and the kasha is loose. The end knot is, I've tried to clean it up, and I can clean it up in such a way that it looks pretty, but I can't retie this knot. It's going to have to get rewrapped, which is something that is going to cost a couple $100 from somebody that knows what they're doing. It's probably a good chance to get a less shitty shaped CA.s at the same time. But anyway, the point is that it's got to get rewrapped now. This is completely unacceptable as well. It's equally unacceptable for the amount of time that I've used it as the blade deforming on my stand. The blade would be something that would have to be sent off, and I don't know if that blade could be fixed from the standpoint you could put a better edge on it, and maybe the temper got better as the edge went up. It could be sharpened, it could be reprofiled, but I don't know if you can fix the temper. Here at least you can rewrap it, but you can't fix the knot. Something else has to happen, and it costs $100 or a couple $100 oftentimes to do that. And for 3 hours of usage, I mean, you can see all of the footage of me using it. It's not a lot. I'm not being overly aggressive or assertive or really yanking on the kasha at all. As well as the ito is just not very tight in general. No surprise, I suppose, that the kasha has come undone, and these little white pieces of hishigami, the paper underneath the folds in the ito, have shown, and it kind of detracts from the black on blackie with black theme. But this kasha coming off is just not acceptable. It's not good, and it feels like this sword has burned me twice, and it's rather unpleasant. And I don't know what to say. Like, I desperately want to like the sword, but in any case, even if I disregard the kasha, it's not a fantastic cutter. That might just be me, but you hopefully have the weapon dynamics computer and some visuals of it working to maybe make a better decision on that. But I can't argue that in one sword I've got, the ito is loose, and the other sword, the edge was easily damaged. And do you fucking have to buy two of these things and maybe mix and match the parts that are supposed to hold up and actually work together? One of them is going to have an okay blade, the other is going to have an okay handle. I mean, that's some bullshit. This sword is not something I can frankly recommend. This is the second time I've had really a fundamental issue with it not performing for as long as it should, and breaking on some stupid shit. Now, it might be the ito. Some folks are cool with the inevitable duct tape around the handle. Some folks might be okay with just throwing some blob of glue on there, but honestly, for a sword that costs this much money, I don't think that's acceptable. After 3 hours of use, this kasha fucking coming off like this is just not, it's not okay. It's some bullshit. So those are my thoughts. That's why I was saving it to the end, is that the kasha coming undone to me speaks, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's not something that I say is okay. The ito came loose. I'm disappointed. Can't recommend. 0 stars. In fact, I'm really kind of burnt on this because it's the second time this sword has had a fundamental issue. I guess I'd prefer the kasha come loose. It's a common thing that happens after some usage. It's something that a lot of practitioners are going to have to deal with, and it's a very common thing to happen. A bad heat treat is realistically a much more severe problem, but still, after 3 hours of use, even as a second-hand blade, I mean, even if it just sat there for years, I mean, it sucks. It just sucks. So that's what I've got for you. I at least it's some different results. So I guess there's that. And I hope the information in chat has been helpful. That's really all I have. I don't want to belabor the point anymore. I've shared about as much as I can. Hopefully the supplemental information has helped. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.